My name's Beth, and I'm a programming coordinator for the St. Johns County Main Library. I'm about to meet with local photographer Lenny Foster, who's going to tell us about his photo series Where We Stand, which incorporates important sites of the civil rights movement in St. Augustine into his photographs. Lenny Foster will be showing his work at the Main Library throughout the month of December, so I think this is going to be pretty interesting. Let's go. Hi, I'm here with Lenny Foster, owner of Gallery 144 in downtown St. Augustine, and also a very amazing photographer. I've been walking around his space and enjoying what I'm seeing quite a lot. Do you mind telling me a little bit about yourself and how you came to be in St. Augustine?
It was a minor miracle. You know, when you move somewhere and you think that it's your it place and I'll never leave here. Well, I came to Taos on a vacation to visit my dad and mom were in Palm Coast. So I came to visit my dad and mom for his 85th birthday. His 91st birthday is Saturday.
Oh.
He's still with us. And I met a friend here in St. Augustine. I knew that she was close to Palm Coast, so I met her here and we met at the Present Moment Cafe,
Lovely space.
and which was a nice place to be introduced to St. Augustine. And she took me on a 3-hour tour of St. Augustine, like Gilligan's Island. A 3-hour tour.
And here you are.
Yeah, right. So it was wonderful, and I went back to Taos after my dad's birthday and our little vacation here, and St. Augustine just stuck with me. You know, I saw, you know, my dad and mom and their state, you know, their condition, you know, just being old, and I thought I need to get close to them for a while. And fortunately, I did. But went back to Taos from St. Augustine, and about a month later, I thought, wow, that was an interesting place. And 4 months later or so, we came out for a 2-week spring break, my girlfriend and son, and we spent 2 weeks. And I got to know St. Augustine, the art scene, and we, you know, we rented a place on Anastasia Island, and came to St. Augustine every couple of days or so, and you know, did the tour stuff, and went back to Taos, and she was ready to pack up like the next month. I'm like, well, let's kind of think about it. But anyway, 6 months later, we're here.
Well, I'm glad you're here, and you have this amazing project that you have been working on. There's a piece behind you that we can see behind you in the camera. Do you mind talking about this project, how that came to be, and what it involves?
Well, I'm really excited about this project. I've been working on it for, I think, 3.5 years, and have gone out on maybe 65 or so shoots to get images. I was just thinking about that the other day, counting the images that I've done and printed, the ones I've done and haven't printed yet, and others that are in various stages of production. But I had moved temporarily to Lincolnville on MLK. My partner and I, we went our separate ways for a bit, and so I rented an apartment at MLK, and in the evenings I would ride my bike through Lincolnville, and I started noticing the Freedom Trail markers, historic markers. And not long after that, I used my cell phone. There's a recordings for each marker, so you could dial in, and I would ride my bike to 2 or 3 of these sites every evening, and I would also read and also listen to the recording of what happened at this particular location. And before coming to St. Augustine, I knew nothing of its history. Ponce de Leon, which we learned in elementary school, but beyond that, and the Fountain of Youth, you know, beyond that, not much. But I knew nothing of the African American history here, you know, dating back to the late 1500s, the African history.
From the very beginning, from the very first trip here.
The first Africans that set foot on this continent it happened right down the road at Fort Mose, not at Jamestown. But anyway, so I discovered the African American history and then the civil rights history, which was so rich. I mean, this was a hotbed, literally, of activity in St. Augustine. And a lot occurred right on MLK, which I think then was called Central Avenue, where Dr. King had preached in a couple of churches down the street, where Jackie Robinson came to speak. Andrew Young had been here. Ralph Abernathy, the Reverend C.T. Vivian. I'm seeing all these names and looking and starting to discover the list of events that happened here. A lot of the initial civil rights actions took place in St. Augustine because it was, at the time, one of the most segregated cities in the country. And so a lot of the initial actions happened here, which caused it to be one of the most violent cities in America because of the opposition of civil rights activists coming here trying to integrate businesses and the beaches and businesses. So I find out what had happened here, and at the same time, I think this was around the time that professional football player Colin Kaepernick started taking a knee in protest against how people of color were being treated by certain police departments across the country. So his protests, of course, sparked a lot of debate and controversy. And at the same time, I'm discovering what happened here, and I started putting two and two together, and I wanted to show, why we protest, why we march, why we kneel, why we pray, and where we stand, what we're really about, where we come from as a people, and what has happened, and now, of course, what is happening. So initially, I started out at the slave market. That was the first image of the series. I had borrowed these slave shackles that my sister had bought years ago in West Africa doing a tour. And I took those down to the slave market, and one of the street guys, which I tend to use them as models, and I paid them, and he allowed me to photograph his feet. It's kind of funny, you approach a guy and says, "Hey man, can I photograph your feet?" Like, oh, it's not that kind of party, dude. But anyway, I explained to him what I was about, and he says, "Oh yeah, I'll do it." So that was the first piece, and it's really powerful. You'll take a look at it. Yeah. Shackles on those bricks, and that was the first image. And then I would do a little research. I would hear about a story, or I would come across one of these plaques, and I would want to do a story about a certain plaque. So I decided to take shoes representing individuals and place them in historic places, and then write a little narrative. And with each image created, typically it would lead to another image, where there would be a fact or a mention of a person's name or another historic building or location. And so that would lead me to another location or another story, and investigating. And then I found myself being like a little history detective. And it was more so for my own good. I wanted to learn what happened here and who was here and why. And, so that started me on this journey of documenting and telling stories. And the more I got into it and the more I shared what I was doing, I started getting great feedback from people that, one, had been here for a while, people that knew these stories, that maybe had lived through these stories, and thought that they should be shared. And there's also people on the other side. So why don't you just let bygones be bygones? Why do you want to stir up the past? Why do you want to create controversy or division or all the all the storylines.
Yeah.
And what my mission has been is just to tell the stories and I think using the shoes makes it easy for people to access the stories. I mean, you start with the image and then you get into the story, but it's easier to understand both from an aesthetic perspective and also, standing in someone's shoes. And it's easy to do once you realize what the story is.
It is. It's much more powerful just looking at the image behind you. If it was just an image of the sidewalk, it's harder to connect to that image. But with the shoes there, you can understand the story and envision the people wearing those shoes.
Right. And in the case of that image, the center pair of shoes on the shoes on their side represents Andrew Young. When he came here he didn't come here to do a protest. He came here to speak, and he was kind of drawn in by local activists into protesting and marching. And he went into the downtown plaza at night and was confronted by what they allegedly were Klan members, and they beat him down and almost killed him. So that image there represents that incident. So I'm not telling, all of the stories aren't harsh. There are a lot of harsh stories, of course, but there are some that are joyful. There's a singer, Lincolnville singer, Debbie Moore, who had developed some national and international fame, and I heard about her story, and so I wanted to dedicate an image to her. So I went to the Lewis Auditorium, and they allowed me to. One of the professors, I can't remember her name, but she made it possible for me to go into the auditorium and have the stage man turn on the lights for me. I think we actually used this stool right here.
Oh, yeah.
My late mother's shoes, and so there's a spotlight on this pair of shoes, and I just write a little story about Debbie Moore, which is quite sweet. I'm working on about, I think, 42 stories at this moment.
Wow.
I have a beautiful new image that represents Janie Price, who was a nurse. She was the first African-American nurse at Flagler Hospital. And she was also a civil rights activist. In fact, when she went to college in Atlanta, her roommate was dating Martin Luther King Jr.
Wow.
before he became who he was. And years later, when she was finished school and he was starting his mission, he came here to speak and recognized her in a crowd and called her out. He says, "Janie, is that you?" Yeah.
That's
and
neat.
So she was one of the people that hosted Dr. King when he came to St. Augustine to speak. And of course, he wouldn't stay at the same house night after night. They would have to move him to different locations, so
Yeah.
he wouldn't be killed here. Of course, he eventually was. But Janie, this new image I have speaks to when Janie picked Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy up at the airport, and she drove them back in her car, and the Klan members found out about that. So one day when she came out of work, one day or night, I don't recall, they had flipped her car upside down. And she was brave and strong and determined, and she had the car flip back on its wheels, I'm sure like with a tow truck or something, crane, and she drove it around like that for a while just to show she's not afraid. So I love the stories of courage, and a lot of these people were very courageous because they were up against the possibility of death for trying to integrate, trying to protest, trying to just be treated as equals.
Yeah. The Lincolnville Museum has a really nice little exhibit on Jeannie Price.
Yes, yes.
So you are going to be showing some of your pieces at the main library throughout the month of December. Can we take a peek at a couple pieces now? Would that be okay?
Sure. I'm fairly certain I'll have these two. This represents the first place in St. Augustine, public place to be integrated, which was the historic putt-putt golf down on the bayfront.
Wow. And what's this one here?
That represents, it's called the Pastor's Shoes. And this First Methodist Church, a block away from here, in 1964, Dr. King was denied entry and was actually physically removed from the property. So he wasn't allowed to go and worship, and black families were also removed from that when they would go in and try to worship. Years later, in 2018, Pastor Juana Jordan from Jacksonville, she becomes the pastor of this church. In her first year as pastor, she got a phone call from a former parishioner, and he wanted her to officiate at his mother's funeral. And to come to find out, his grandfather were one of the men that refused to allow black people to go worship at that church. And he knew something was wrong with that, and he asked his grandfather at the time, why? And he never got a response. But 60 years later, in an effort to right a wrong, he asked Pastor Juana to officiate at his mother's funeral. Wow. A powerful, powerful story. So that's one of the images that I'll share. This one up top here represents Georgia Representative John Lewis, who made a speech at the Casa Monica Hotel. I think it was 2010, the anniversary of the signing of the Civil Rights Act. I'll probably have this image here representing Dr. King when he visited Lincolnville. He liked to stay at Mrs. Tyson's house because he loved her iced tea. This represents Frederick Douglass, who in 1869 came here to do a speech at the Opera House that was on St. George Street. And this is right at the city gates, the entrance to St. Augustine. This one, which I'll also show, represents Jacob Lawrence, who was a Harlem Renaissance painter. His claim to fame was this major series called the Migration Series, which were paintings documenting African Americans leaving the South and moving up north in various places. And I think he was either just finishing that series or had already finished, and he was stationed here in the Coast Guard. And his commanding officer kind of knew of him and appreciated him, and he allowed Jacob to paint in a spare room in his house.
Very cool. So
this represents Jacob Lawrence.
That's very neat.
And the last one I'll show you maybe is this large piece, which is called the Lunch Counter Sit-In, when students, I think they were at Florida Normal College, would try to integrate lunch counters. And this was at the Woolworths, which was located downtown. Mm-hmm. Now I think it's I forget what bank it is, or Wells Fargo Bank. Yeah. But they have a portion of the lunch counter in that same location. So I wanted to show 4 kids that were arrested and held for over 6 months for simply trying to integrate a lunch counter.
Well, these are very beautiful and they're very powerful, and I'm just so excited that we are going to get to have them in the main library. So anybody can come anytime during main library's opening hours throughout the month of December. And I just thank you so much for joining us today and sharing some of this amazing history with us. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm excited about being able to have the images up in the library and have people come in and view them and learn the stories that maybe wouldn't come into a gallery to look at the artwork. The most important thing is making people aware of what's what happened, what's happening now, and what might happen if things don't change.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining me. If you're interested in learning more about this topic, just visit our library catalog online, www.sjcpls.org, or visit us at any of our local libraries. We hope to see you in the main library to see Mr. Foster's work throughout the month of December, and I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.